Hey guys, welcome to the Versetta Stone install video. Today is going to be the quick down and dirty, how to put this stuff up and how to get a good install. It's the small details that matter with this stuff, so let's get right into it. For starters, let's look at some of the tools that I use to install this Versetta Stone. Let's start out with the big tool first. You're going to need some kind of saw to cut these panels. I use a chop saw with a masonry blade in it. Seems to work really well. You're going to need a way to clean the panels off, the grooves. I use a brush. You're going to need a way to chip some of the panels, the tongues off the panels. I use a framing hammer, the nail pull side, a 2-foot level, safety glasses, a couple of wood shims, tape measure, pencil, a utility knife to open up the packages. I like to fasten my panels with screws, so I have a driver and some decking screws. Now let's look at the Versetta Stone product. There's two different panels that you're going to need. You're going to need your flats, which have the black strip nail flange at the top. You're also going to need your universal corners, which have the red flange at the top. Let's talk weather barriers. Water is going to get behind this stone product and going to get to your wall system. And that's why the Versetta Stone has a built-in rain screen. It allows that water that gets behind the cladding to drain out of your wall system. I use 2 weather barriers behind my stone. This outside weather barrier also acts as a vapor barrier. Here in North Carolina, when you get those hot, humid days and the stone is wet and that sun comes out and it just cooks that stuff and steams the water out of the concrete, you get some really intense vapor drives. And I want that vapor drive to be pushed out away from the house and not seep into my wall system. So I have a sacrificial weather barrier, vapor barrier on the outside. Behind that, I have my zip sheathing system with all my seams taped and my nail holes liquid flashed. So we have a watertight system. We're not allowing any water or vapor get into the wall system behind the Versetta Stone. That's very important that you have that set up and drained properly. I also wrap this weather barrier, vapor barrier around my door frames, and I'll show you why that's important here in a minute. It's probably maybe a controversial way to do this. I like the look, and I think this is a valid, safe way to drain water away from the house and also keep the stone from keeping my wood trim wet. I want the air to be able to get around this trim and dry it out if it does get wet. Here's a look at how I do my Versetta Stone next to my doors. I use the universal corners and I gap it just slightly next to my trim. There's different ways to run these panels. We're going to run this front side of the house here from right to left. We're going to start here next to this door frame. I'm going to start with the universal corner. Because I don't use the J channel and because this is a covered porch area, this isn't going to see a lot of water, but since my weather barrier is wrapped around the corner, if any water does get in here, I'm not too worried about it because it has a way to drain out and not seep back into my wall system. So I start with this universal corner. Since I'm going to run a flat next to it, I have to cut this end off. 2 reasons. Because I want to cut the finish off and have a nice flat surface for the flat to butt up against. And because this groove stops on the end of these universal corners and you need this next row, the lip needs to sit down in that groove. If you don't cut the end off, the next panel, the next row is not going to set square with this panel. I'm going to push it tight up against my wood and then I'm going to back it off just slightly. This is an imperfect product, right? It's concrete, so not all these products are even level in one piece. It may have a little bit of a hump or a swell to it. So I use a level just to make sure I'm not getting crazy off with these panels, but just kind of keep that in mind. It's an imperfect product. These panels are 3 foot long, so I third them. So this is a full panel. The next panel will be 2 foot. The next panel will be 1 foot. And then we'll take those 3 rows and run them down. So that looks good. We're gonna go ahead and sink 4 screws into this. If you didn't watch the previous video, our girt boards behind the sheathing here. We planned to run this stone in this manner, so every screw that I put in and every panel is going to be into framing. Gives you a really nice solid connection, and it makes the install easy because I don't have to try to guess where the studding is behind the panel. I don't suck the screws super tight. There's going to be a little bit of a gap on the bottom of this next panel when it sets over it, so having your head of your screw not completely flush is fine. We're going to go ahead and get this next row started. Again, push it tight. Gap it just slightly. I'm going to throw the level on this. It should be pretty close. Not too shabby. We have our 3 rows started here, and I want to show you what this flat looks like. You can see this flat has a little lip here, and when you put this up against your universal corner that you just cut, you can see you can't quite get those tight, so this piece here needs to be chipped off. So let's do that and we'll get a nice tight fit. So we're just going to chisel this off here. Just a little bit more taken off. A couple of things when you're putting these together. You want to make sure this transition is close to being level. Make sure your gap here looks good, which it does. I'm going to throw the level on it. We're pretty close, but you can kind of see this is what I mean by an imperfect product. You probably can't see that, but this stone has just a little bit of a hump right here in it. So you just get it the best you can. It becomes really important once we get close up underneath these windows to make sure we're good and running straight under the windows. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and fasten this. And now this next row, you can see this little bit of a lip here is going to sit down in this groove. So you need to make sure right here's the groove, and we needed to cut this off here, both to get a nice fit here, but also so this next piece, this groove, is continuous as it goes through here. If you look at the universal corner, you can see here the groove ends, so you need to cut this portion off if you're going to lay another row on top of this beyond the edge. There's not a lot of stuff in this groove, but this is where I can take my brush here and just any kind of stone or debris that's in there, clean that out. So before I knock the lip off, I always slide it up and make sure it's gonna fit good. And you can see this stone has a little rock here. So that's not gonna work. So we're gonna trade it out for another one. And you may have to do this several times in your project. So it's good to have extra supply of material. We're gonna try this piece and see how it fits. Yeah, it's a little tall, so that one's not ideal. Try this piece. That piece sits a little lower, so I'm not too happy with that piece either. Okay, that's a good piece, a nice fit there. So we're gonna go ahead and chip this off. Since we're under a window here, I'm going to throw the level on it. Get a good check. Looks like pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and fasten that. All right, we're going to come back up and try this top piece. Good fit. Perfectly level. So again, not a true representation of what this stuff is. Just keep in mind, it's an imperfect product, so you got to make adjustments as you go. But that looks good, so we're going to go ahead and knock the lip off of this, so I can get a tight fit. And let's just pull it away so we're not knocking it down in the groove. So that's a look at what we've just done. 6 pieces there. We're gonna keep running it all the way down till we get to the corner, and I'll show you how we're gonna do that transition. But this stuff is pretty easy. What I'll do is take some measurements underneath the window on this side and on this side and make sure that I'm square, because our capstone is gonna run right underneath this. So if it's off a little bit, it'll be noticeable. So we wanna run that as square as possible. So let's do that. Inevitably, some of your product is gonna be damaged when you buy enough of this stuff. And if you can see right here, a slight hairline crack in this panel, it's hard to see on the front side. So I always look at the top of my panel and see if I see any hairline cracks. You don't get a lot of them, but every once in a while you'll find one. And this panel, we'll still use it. We're not gonna junk it. It'll be a partial panel, so we'll end up cutting that bad side out and use it either as a starter or towards the end somewhere. But just kind of keep an eye out for your panels. You can also check them by row. Once you get up here, these all look good. I don't see any cracks on any of them. And these here all look good as well. I don't see any cracks on those. So just every once in a great while, You'll find one. Don't throw it away. You can cut it and use it. Spot to watch out for, this little goop here where it's obstructing the channel. We want to clean that out as well. Your next piece that sits on top of this, that's going to cause a problem. So just take your hammer, chip that out, get your stone dust out of there. And now we got a clear pathway for our next panel to sit on top, and it's not going to rock on that stuff that was gooped in there. There's a look at how the starter strips butt up against your door trim, your brick mold. I think that's a nice look, and that's also why I go with a black weather barrier behind it. You can see it if you look really, really close. So you want some kind of dark color behind it, but that's what she looks like. And then as we go, I'm taking measurements from this corner of the window down and that corner of the window down just to make sure we're running good. We're 10 7/8 on both. So that'll make a nice symmetrical transition as we go. I'll show you how we're gonna do the steel on another video for that. I think it's a really good way of trimming out the windows with the capstone. And then once we get down here, we'll do the same thing. We'll check, make sure we're running good. You can snap a line if you choose across. I just make sure, I just keep putting the level on it, make sure we're looking good as we go across, and I'll check it once we get down to the next window. Here's a good example of the rain screen. You can kind of see the gap behind each panel. Allows that water that does get behind the panels to drain out down to the J channel, which has weep holes, down to the flashing, kicking it out. All right, let's talk a little bit about how I do these corners. First, I'm gonna get a piece that I wanna use to start on this side. And it's gonna go right flush. This panel is gonna be a universal end, and it's gonna run beyond here. So what I'm going to do is to get my length of this panel, I'm gonna stick this panel up here that I wanna use. And I'm gonna take my tape and get a decent measurement here. Try to find the longest part of this panel here that sticks out. Looks like about 19 inches. So, and I'm gonna cut it just a little bit long. I'm gonna cut it 19 1/4 just to make sure I get it up here and it has the fit that I like. And if not, I can change this panel out and swap things around, and I still have enough room where I haven't cut this panel too short. So we're gonna cut it 19 1/4. Lip off. So let's see, 19 1/4 here. We've knocked this lip off already. So we're gonna slide those together. It's a nice fit, so that'll be a good piece for there. Let's check this side. That's gonna be a good fit there as well. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is take this piece back down. And I'm gonna knock this lip off of this because we need it to fit flush up against the back. Now what I like to do is just to get a mark here of where I want this to end. So we need to shorten this front piece up just a little bit more, which is fine. An extra cut. put a mark on the back. Let's get a measurement. I'm gonna say it looks like 1/4 of an inch. Yes, we're gonna cut this down to 19. When you guys are cutting these, try to plan your cuts so it doesn't fall into a groove or right next to a groove where you have a little sliver of a stone next to where your cut is. This panel worked out pretty good. That's what I like to do with my partial panels. And again, the best thing to do is you're going to have some cracked panels regardless. If you're ordering, I think we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.5 pallets worth. There's some cracked ones. So this is a good place to use those up. Good fit there. And we got a nice fit there. So let's go ahead and fasten this front panel. That needs to be right there. Okay, that's our first course. The next course will be just exactly the opposite. So it'll be a universal end on this side and a flat panel on this side to put the seam here. And as we go up, we'll stagger the seams. You'll see what it looks like. So this panel will have to be cut down, which is okay. I just want to see how she fits. That looks pretty good, actually. Like that. So we're going to go ahead and get measurement this way. (29 3/8). 29 3/8, and we'll leave the line on. That's a good fit right there. We're a little bit low over there, but that doesn't bother me too much. We can fix that with the next course. But this corner looks really nice. You just have to let your OCD dictate how much you want to adjust things. I like the look here. We're a little bit off down there, but that's okay. We can shim that up just a slight touch. And I think we'll be okay. So we're going to go ahead. This panel needs to be cut down to a 2-foot section, so I'm going to cut this off and then we'll get these fastened. That'll be our second course. The next course is going to be a little tricky because a 3-foot panel comes out to about right here and you don't want a small piece on the end, so we're going to have to piece in there to make it look right. So I'll show you how I do that. So now this piece is running slightly downhill. This is where your wood shims come into play. I'm just going to shim this up just a little bit. Sometimes these panels have a little bit of an arch in them on the bottom. So if you cut a panel, you may be dealing with an arch. And sometimes it doesn't take much. That's about all it takes, is just a sliver of an adjustment. And that doesn't throw us off up there. And now this I want to try to even up just a little bit. So again, I'm just going to use a small wood shim here. You got to kind of decide what you want more. Do you want more of a gap down here or a little bit of a lip here? And I think we'll kind of split the difference there. And I think the next piece, we'll find one that maybe has a little bit of an arch to it. And we'll be able to correct this little lip on the next course. Now for the third course, again, we're gonna offset this by using a universal corner on the end. And what I really wanna do is split this one in half. So if I use a 16-inch piece, you don't really wanna go below 12 inches on your length. A 16 and a 26 should do it. So let's go try to find a 16 universal corner with the end on the left side that we've already cut. Okay, again, this piece, 16-inch piece, you can see it's off. We're off just a little bit. This side has to come up. So again, I'm just gonna shim it slightly. That's not perfect, but it's a little compromise between the gap underneath here and being level on the top. So I think we're good there. Now let's get a measurement for this piece, and we're looking at 25 3/4. So I'm going to show you guys what I mean by trying to find a piece that you like that fits with an imperfect product. You can see how this stone sits lower than the universal corner here. I'm going to take this stone out and we're going to put this other stone in and we're going to slide it up. They both sit flush on the bottom and you can see how much of a better fit I get here. Again, you want to try to get these transitions as smooth as possible because it just makes it easier when you're running the next course. There's no gap here on either one of them. So they both fit nice at the bottom, but the other one was just a little bit narrower in that spot where it was cut. So we're going to go with this piece and put it in. That'll complete our third course around the corner. We got one more to go. There's our corner, 3 courses up. We have one more to go. And we got a good start on this side here. Before we do this next course, since this panel is going to be a full one, I'm going to have to run a few panels out this way so we can, again, stagger our seams on this side and get it run down the last side of the house. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll give you a look at this final course once it's all said and done. There's a look at the corner, all finished up, 4 courses high. What I'm doing is I'm finding 2 straight boards here and I'm finding the groove and I'm just following the edge of that groove because that's where my wainscoting sits, my capstone. And I mark a line here, which I'm gonna go ahead and mark. These are pretty close. Now I'm gonna take my square, I've marked it inside and outside, and I'm gonna take my square and find the angle. That's actually really close to a perfect 90. So I'm gonna cut both my pieces at 45 and we'll see how it fits. Okay, let's see how good of a fit we got. That's not too bad. That's about as good as you're gonna get. So we're gonna go ahead. You want a little bit of a gap there for as this stuff expands and contracts. So we're gonna go ahead, that's pretty good. I really like that corner. So we're gonna go ahead and fasten these up here. Trying to have this piece as your last piece where you're cutting it to the appropriate length and getting the angle and a good fit on the end is pretty tough. So it's just easier, do all your corners and then come back and the last piece, have it either end into a door or window or what have you, something straight, or in this case, we'll just end in the middle. I'll do the corner and come this way, and our last piece will be straight cuts on both ends. We are on the south side of the house here, and I'm up to the last window. Have these windows complete. What I'm gonna do here, I like to seam it if I can underneath the window so I can get screws on both sides of the capstone. So I'm gonna come back from this end and put a full piece in so I have a seam here, put another full piece in, and then whatever's left, we'll cut that to fit in here, and that'll give us a nice finished look here on this side. The Versetta stone will be done. I want to show you also how I'm doing underneath the windows, because when we get to the back side, we have some windows where full pieces of the capstone are going to be underneath the window, so I won't be able to get any screws in it. So I'm trying this out. It seems to work pretty good. Let me show you what I'm doing. When you're going to adhere your Versetta stone to a wall, in my case underneath the windows, you need to have something solid to adhere that stone to. Trying to glue it or adhere it to the vapor barrier, that paper behind there, is not going to work. So I'm using a galvanized metal lathe that you would typically find in a stucco application. I'm going to put some screws in it and you'll see this will be a good solid base to adhere the stone to. Attaching this metal screen to the wall is pretty simple. I'm using number 10 1.5" stainless steel pancake head screws. They fit perfectly in the holes in the netting. And the one thing I will say when you're putting this stuff on is make sure you drive those screws in far enough. Don't leave them stick out at all, because it'll hold the capstone out away from the wall, and then your adjoining capstones, that joint is going to be a little off because you have the stone protruding just a little bit more than the neighboring stone. But otherwise, this is pretty easy. I think I put 4 screws in per window to hold it in, to hold the netting onto the wall anyways. And then the stone, if at all possible, I try to seam it again under each window. That way I'm not completely relying on the adhesive. I can leave a little bit of that nailing flange on to hold the end and then use the adhesive underneath the windows. Kind of that belt and suspender type approach, and just give a little extra security to those pieces of stone. So there's probably a bunch of different ways you can cut this metal flange off. I'm using an angle grinder with a metal cutting wheel. That allowed me to get the flange cut nice and flush with the top of the stone, because it's kind of a tight fit underneath that window. I couldn't have any interference, and this worked best for me. I'm using gray Loctite premium construction adhesive. Comes in a what used to be a 10-ounce cartridge, now a 9-ounce cartridge, and I'm using, I don't know, maybe a quarter to a $1/2 size dab I'm putting over around each screw on that metal screen. I guess the big thing is make sure you get enough on there that it's going to actually make contact with the back side of the stone. You can also put a little adhesive on the stone, the flat that I guess goes underneath that capstone would be the way to describe it. And that way you can adhere the back side of that capstone, and the bottom side is adhered to that 4th course underneath of it. Since I have a lot of the nailing flange left on this piece, I just put a small dab on the top of that 4th course there, kind of right down in the groove. The next piece I put another dab in there as well. I also use shims, and you'll see when we get to the back window, when I do the piece where the entire nail flange is cut off, I shim it pretty heavily to hold it in there. This stuff takes 24 hours to cure, so you want that stone in there and you don't want it to move, because if it cures after the stone moves, you're going to have a heck of a time trying to go out and and breaking it loose to try to straighten it out. So put enough shims in there where that's not going to move on you, and it's going to give that adhesive a chance to set up and fully cure. And then for me, I come out the following day and pull those shims out, and we're good to go. But this is what I mean by just kind of planning things out, planning the layout where you can see this stone ends almost smack dab in the middle of that window, not quite halfway. But that allows me to leave a couple of feet worth of nailing flange on that stone. Again, just a belt and suspenders type approach. If at all possible, you can leave some of that nailing flange on. I highly suggest that you do it. Here we go with the other half. We're going to go ahead and put a couple of big dabs on that screen, and then stick the stone in there, and then shim it and leave it set up. And there I did put a little bit on the bottom side there, since I got over a foot going underneath that window. You could also put a dab in between the two stones if you wanted to on the butt ends, if you're at all concerned about it. I mean, really, I don't think there's a wrong way to do this, to put it on places to put adhesive. Just whatever gives you the warm fuzzy, go ahead and do. But again, the main thing is don't just use the adhesive to the vapor barrier or your weather barrier underneath the window, because that's not going to hold it. Eventually that'll pull loose, and you don't want that. So using a piece of galvanized metal or stainless steel or anything that's going to give that adhesive some surface area to adhere to that's solid. I suppose you could put a solid metal strip underneath there if you really wanted to. Bunch of different ways again to do this. This is just how I'm doing it, and it seems to work really well. That metal lathe is relatively inexpensive too. I only had to buy one sheet, and I think it was 22 bucks for one sheet, and I only used half a sheet, so I have enough for the shop project down the road if we decide to put the Versetta stone on the shop. Here we go, fitting that last piece in there. Again, I think it's easier to piece in the middle here with two flat cuts versus ending on a corner and trying to get that corner cut perfect. I promise you, with this product, not every stone is exactly the same, so when you cut these corners, you may have to cut them more than once to get a nice look on the corner. I guess it depends on your OCD, how bad it is. But for me, you know, some of the corners I had to cut a couple of times. So I would rather start there, work my way in, and then cut this middle in where it's flat on both sides. It's a much, much easier cut compared to those angles. Here's a look at the finished side. All done. And I think this piece here isn't even really noticeable, and I think it's a better way, instead of trying to get this last piece, because these angles are tough to cut, I'm telling you. It's easier just to piece it in my opinion, and run with it. So there we are, one side done, 4 more to go. For these big windows in the back side, we ended up with one piece underneath the window that had to cut the flange off the whole thing, and we just shim it and glue the back side and glue underneath. And I'll leave that set for a couple of days and we should be good. That wraps up the Versetta stone for this project. I'll probably later on, I'm thinking I may wrap these posts, the bottom 3 feet, with Versetta stone as well, and make a nice stone column. That'll be in a later video. For now, the house is complete. We can move on to steel. And it's just in time, honestly, because I'm getting to the point where I'm ready to move on to something else. The downside is I'm going to have to use some ladders. So I'm not looking forward to that, but I am looking forward to getting the outside of this house wrapped up. This will probably be the last video before the end of the year. So if I don't see you again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you on the next video.